The year 1944 began with a sense of unease for Germany. Victories that had once seemed endless were now distant memories. The tide of the war had shifted, and the once invincible German army was now on the defensive. Despite the mounting pressure, the Nazi regime maintained a tight grip on information. Propaganda still filled the airwaves, assuring the German people of ultimate victory. However, behind the facade of strength, cracks were beginning to appear. The relentless Allied bombing campaign was taking a toll on German cities and morale. Rationing had become a way of life, and the constant threat of air raids cast a long shadow over everyday life. The German home front, once a symbol of national unity and resilience, was beginning to fray at the edges. The year 1944 would prove to be a turning point, as the war that had once seemed a distant threat came crashing down on German soil. The combined might of the Allied forces, coupled with the internal weaknesses of the Nazi regime, would ultimately bring about the collapse of the German home front. What followed was a period of unprecedented destruction, hardship, and ultimately defeat. By 1944, the impact of the war on German civilians was becoming impossible to ignore. Allied bombing raids intensified, targeting industrial centers and cities. The once bustling streets of Berlin, Hamburg, and Dresden were reduced to rubble. Millions of Germans were left homeless, seeking shelter in makeshift bunkers and subway tunnels. Food and basic necessities became increasingly scarce. The demands of the war effort had drained the German economy. Rationing grew stricter, leaving families struggling to survive on meager portions. The constant threat of death from above and the growing shortages on the ground eroded the morale of the German people. The initial enthusiasm for war had long faded, replaced by fear, uncertainty, and a growing sense of despair. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944 marked a turning point in the war. The German army, stretched thin across multiple fronts, faced a determined enemy fueled by victory. As Allied troops advanced into France and Italy, the German grip on occupied territories crumbled. The relentless Allied air campaign continued to cripple German infrastructure and industry. Transportation networks were disrupted, factories were destroyed, and the German war machine began to grind to a halt. The constant bombing raids also served to demoralize the German population, highlighting the growing vulnerability of the Third Reich. The once impenetrable fortress of Germany was now under attack from all sides. Section 4: Unraveling of a Nation, Economic and Military Impacts. The combined effects of Allied bombing, resource shortages, and military defeats had a catastrophic impact on the German economy. Industrial production plummeted, crippling the war effort. The transportation system, essential for moving troops and supplies, was in shambles. Faced with mounting losses, German military leaders were forced to make desperate decisions. Young boys and elderly men were conscripted into the army, often with inadequate training and equipment. Resources were diverted away from civilian needs to support the dwindling war effort. The German economy, already strained by years of war, was pushed to the brink of collapse. Section 5: The Final Blow, 1945, and the Legacy of Collapse. By early 1945, the writing was on the wall for the Third Reich. Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin from the east, while Allied armies advanced from the west. German cities lay in ruins, the economy was in shambles, and the German people were physically and psychologically exhausted. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops just blocks away, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, marking the end of World War II in Europe. The collapse of the German home front was complete. The once proud nation lay in ruins, defeated and occupied. The war had left an indelible scar on the German psyche, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of totalitarianism and aggression.